It was a beautiful evening in the heart of the city. The sun had just set, casting a soft, golden glow over the streets. The luxurious restaurant stood proudly in the middle of it all, its glass windows gleaming in the dim light. Inside, the air was filled with the hum of polite conversation, clinking glasses, and soft music playing in the background. The restaurant was known for its high-end service and exclusive clientele. Only the wealthiest and most important people were able to enjoy a meal here. At the entrance stood a tall, well-dressed man in a black suit. His job was to keep track of who could enter and who couldn't. He had a sharp eye for detail, making sure every guest met the restaurant's strict dress code. No exceptions. A black woman in her late 20s, wearing a stunning red dress, walked up to the door. She had just returned from an important business meeting and was eager to treat herself to a nice dinner. Her smooth skin glowed under the streetlights, and her confidence showed in the way she walked. She smiled as she approached the door, looking forward to her reservation. The doorman looked at her carefully. He paused for a moment, as if unsure of what to do. He looked her up and down, then stepped forward, blocking her way. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice a little cold. "You'll have to wait for a moment." The woman, surprised but calm, stopped and gave him a small nod. "Is there a problem?" she asked politely, unsure what had caused the delay. The doorman didn't immediately respond. He glanced around, and after what seemed like an eternity, he finally spoke again. "I'll need to check with the manager. Please wait here." Confused, she nodded again, a slight frown appearing on her face. She had made a reservation days earlier, and there had been no mention of a dress code issue. She glanced around at the guests entering and leaving the restaurant, all of them looking perfectly ordinary in their evening attire. She adjusted her dress, hoping this wouldn't take too long. Moments later, a manager appeared. He looked to be in his early 40s, wearing a crisp white shirt and a black vest. He smiled politely, but there was something in his eyes that made the woman feel uneasy. He didn't seem to recognize her from her reservation. "Good evening, ma'am," he said, his tone polite but distant. "I'm afraid your attire doesn't meet our dress code standards. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." She blinked in disbelief. She had spent a lot of time picking out her outfit, and it was definitely elegant enough for a high-end restaurant. She hadn't been told about any restrictions when she made the reservation. Still, she remained calm. "Are you saying my dress isn't good enough?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. She had a strong presence, and it was clear she was not about to back down without an explanation. The manager's eyes flickered for a moment. "Yes, I'm afraid so. I'm sorry for the inconvenience." Her heart sank. She looked around at the other patrons in the restaurant, some of whom were looking out the windows at her, but no one said a word. She felt small and embarrassed, even though she had done nothing wrong. She stood there, stunned for a moment, as if trying to understand what had just happened. But something inside her began to shift. She wouldn't just stand there and let this unfair treatment slide. She had come here to enjoy a nice meal, not to be judged by her appearance. But more than that, she would not let anyone make her feel inferior. The manager gave her a forced smile. "Please leave, ma'am. I'm sorry for any misunderstanding." As she turned and walked away, the feeling of injustice settled in her chest. This wasn't just about one restaurant. It was about something bigger. The woman stood outside the restaurant, her mind racing. She couldn't believe what had just happened. She had always prided herself on being strong and confident, but today she felt humiliated. How could they turn her away like that? Her heart pounded in her chest as she stood under the soft streetlights, trying to process what had just taken place. She looked back at the restaurant's elegant facade, now seeming cold and distant. Through the glass windows, she could see the warm glow inside, where the rich and powerful dined without a care in the world. She wasn't the only one who had been looking forward to a peaceful, pleasant evening. But now, all she had was the sting of rejection. The door to the restaurant opened, and a couple of patrons stepped out, talking and laughing, as they left the exclusive dining area. They didn't seem to notice her standing there, but a voice inside her head whispered that it didn't matter. She wasn't going to let this defeat her. No one could judge her worth by her clothes or her appearance. Taking a deep breath, she straightened her shoulders, determined not to let her pride slip away. She was a woman who had worked hard to get where she was in life. She wasn't about to let a moment of discrimination ruin her night or her future. Just as she turned to walk away, she saw a familiar face approaching. It was the manager who had turned her away earlier. He was walking toward her, looking uneasy as if he were unsure about what to do next. The door behind him opened, and she could see the doorman from earlier glancing at her too. For a moment, the woman thought about just walking away. But no, something inside her pushed her to stand her ground. She had been wronged, and she wasn't going to accept it quietly. She turned to face the manager as he stopped in front of her. "Ma'am, I'm terribly sorry," the manager began, his voice faltering. "It seems there's been a misunderstanding." She crossed her arms, narrowing her eyes slightly. "A misunderstanding," she repeated, a hint of disbelief in her tone. "Yes, well, it's just that our dress code is quite specific, and I'm afraid there was a problem with your outfit," he said, trying to explain in a way that didn't sound as harsh as it had before. She took a slow step closer, staring him down. "So, you're saying that because I'm black, I don't belong here?" "Because that's how it feels," she said, her voice calm but firm. Her words carried a weight that made the manager shift uncomfortably. No, that's not what I meant," he stammered. "It's just that." "I'm well aware of the rules," she interrupted, her voice rising slightly. "And I've followed them. I'm dressed appropriately. But your actions speak louder than your words." The manager looked taken aback, but he was clearly at a loss for words. He hadn't expected this reaction. "I'm really sorry for the confusion, ma'am. I'd be happy to offer you a reservation for another time. We could also upgrade you to a special table." She shook her head firmly, not wanting to hear any more of his empty words. "It's too late for that. You've made your point, and I won't be coming back." She turned to walk away, her decision clear. As she stepped into the cool night air, a mix of anger and determination swirled inside her. She didn't know what had driven the manager to treat her that way, but one thing was certain. She wasn't going to let it go unnoticed. She didn't know how yet, but she would make sure others knew what had happened. With every step she took, her mind raced with the possibilities. She was no longer just a woman denied entry to a restaurant. She was someone ready to turn this moment into something bigger, something that would make people think twice about how they treated others. The night air felt cooler as the woman walked down the sidewalk, her heels clicking with each step. She was angry, but more than that, she felt a deep sense of injustice. How could something so small, a dress code, cause her to be treated like this? She had been looking forward to a peaceful evening, a chance to relax and enjoy a good meal after a long day. But now, all she had was a bitter taste in her mouth. Her mind raced as she replayed the moment over and over. She could still hear the manager's voice, cold and dismissive. She could still see the way the doorman had looked her over, as if she didn't belong in that space. She tried to shake it off, but it was hard. There was something about the way they had rejected her that cut deeper than just the words. It wasn't just about the restaurant, she thought. It was about the way she had been made to feel, as though she didn't deserve to be there simply because of her appearance. No matter how she tried to justify it, the more she thought about it, the more she realized that this wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a part of something bigger, something that needed to change. As she walked further from the restaurant, her phone buzzed in her purse. Startled, she pulled it out and checked the screen. It was a message from a friend. She opened it, reading the words, "I saw what happened. I'm so sorry. You deserve better. Let me know if you want to talk." Her friend had seen everything from the street. She smiled faintly at the kindness of the message but shook her head. Talking about it wasn't going to solve anything. She needed to do something. She continued walking, determined not to let this experience define her. But deep down, She knew that it wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the message she would send. She couldn't be the only one who had faced this kind of treatment. Maybe it wasn't always as obvious, but racism still existed in places people didn't want to acknowledge. As she walked, she passed a coffee shop where a few people were sitting at outdoor tables. She paused for a moment, her reflection in the window catching her eye. She was a strong woman, smart, confident, capable. She deserved respect. Everyone deserved respect. And if she wanted to make sure that no one else had to feel the way she did tonight, she was going to have to speak up. She took a deep breath, calming herself. There was no use in stewing over it. It was time to act. With her resolve clear, she pulled her phone out again and typed a message to a lawyer she had worked with before. He was someone who knew how to handle difficult situations, and she knew he would understand. But as soon as she hit send, she realized that her actions had the potential to make a much bigger impact than just a personal complaint. This wasn't just about her getting a free meal or an apology. It was about making sure the restaurant, and anyone who treated people the way she had been treated, knew that there would be consequences for their actions. She wasn't going to let the night end like this. She had a plan, and it was going to be a big one. She wasn't just going to sit back and let the restaurant's refusal to serve her fade into the past. It was time to make sure that her voice, and the voices of those who had been treated unfairly, would be heard. With that thought, she walked toward her next destination, her mind full of possibilities. There was no turning back now. The woman walked through the streets, her mind working at full speed. She had never imagined that one simple act, being denied entry into a restaurant, would spark something so big inside her. The anger she felt earlier was now transforming into something else. It was the kind of strength that came from standing up for what was right, the kind of strength that made her feel unstoppable. She needed to take action, but she also needed to be smart about it. She wasn't going to let the restaurant get away with treating her this way. But more than that, she wanted to make sure that no one else had to feel the way she had felt tonight. The humiliation, the hurt, it was more than she could accept. It wasn't just about her. It was about standing up for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly. She walked faster, the city lights blurring around her. She was heading home, but she wasn't going to just forget about what had happened. She had to do something. It wasn't enough to feel angry. It was time to make a change. As soon as she got home, she sat down at her kitchen table, the cool evening air creeping through the open window. She pulled out her phone and began typing. She wasn't sure exactly how she would turn this around, but she had to start somewhere. First, she needed to make sure the world knew what had happened. She posted a short message on social media, explaining what had happened at the restaurant. She didn't include every detail, just enough to get people's attention. Denied entry to a restaurant tonight for no reason other than my appearance. This needs to change. It was a simple post, but it felt like the first step in something big. She sat back, waiting for her phone to buzz with notifications. It didn't take long. Comments and messages flooded in from people she knew, and from people she didn't know. There were people who shared their own stories of being turned away because of their appearance, their race, or their clothes. She wasn't alone in this. Her heart started to race as the messages kept coming in. It wasn't just her story anymore. It was becoming a movement. She couldn't believe how quickly things were moving. It felt like people were ready for a change. They were ready to speak out. Her phone rang. It was her lawyer, the one she had messaged earlier. "Hello," she answered, her voice steady. "Hey, I saw your post," the lawyer said, his voice calm. "I think you've got something here. We need to make sure we handle this properly, but this could make a real impact." She smiled, feeling a rush of relief. "I knew I had to do something," she replied, "but I didn't expect it to blow up like this." "Just keep me updated," he said. "We'll figure out the next steps. And remember, this is bigger than just one restaurant." That was exactly what she needed to hear. She wasn't just doing this for herself anymore. This was for anyone who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. And now, She had the support she needed to take the next steps. The night didn't feel so cold anymore. As she sat there, reading through the supportive messages, she realized that the moment she'd been waiting for was here. The world was finally starting to listen. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the weight of everything sink in. She knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that this was just the beginning. The fire inside her burned brighter now. She wasn't backing down. The woman sat on her couch, her phone in her hand, scrolling through the flood of messages that had come in since she posted her story. The support was overwhelming. People from all over the country, some of whom she didn't even know, were sharing her post, offering their encouragement, and telling her their own stories of unfair treatment. It felt like she wasn't alone anymore. As the evening passed, she found herself becoming more and more determined. This wasn't just about one restaurant or one night. This was about something much bigger. She had always been strong, but tonight, she felt like she could take on the world. She had the support she needed, and now she had a voice that was being heard. Her phone buzzed again, interrupting her thoughts. It was an unknown number. She hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should answer, but then decided to pick up. "Hello," she said, her voice steady but curious. "Hello," came the response, a calm voice on the other end. "Is this the woman who posted about being turned away from that restaurant?" The woman's heart skipped a beat. It was the celebrity she had been following for years, the same person who had always spoken out for justice and equality. Her hands shook slightly as she recognized the voice. "Yes, that's me," she said, trying to keep her cool. "Who is this?" "My name's Alexis. I saw what happened, and I want you to know that I support you," the celebrity said, her voice warm and kind. "I've been through similar things, and I know how hard it can be to speak out. But what you did was powerful." The woman's breath caught in her throat. "Thank you. I didn't expect anyone like you to reach out." Alexis chuckled softly. "I've been watching your post go viral. People are talking about it, and I think it's time we take this to the next level." The woman sat up straighter. "What do you mean?" "I think we can turn this into something bigger than just your story," Alexis explained. "You've got people's attention now. Let's use it to make some real change. I can help get your message out to a larger platform. We can make sure that no one else has to go through what you did." The woman's heart raced. She had been hoping for something like this, but she never imagined it would happen so quickly. "Are you sure? I mean, I never thought this would blow up like it has. I didn't expect it to get this much attention." "Trust me," Alexis said, her voice full of conviction. "This is just the beginning. And you're not alone in this. There are so many people who feel the same way, but they're afraid to speak up. You've given them a voice, and now we're going to make sure it's heard." The woman felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every person who had ever been treated unfairly. The weight of what she was about to do didn't scare her. It motivated her. "Okay," she said, her voice stronger than before. "Let's do this." Over the next few days, the woman worked closely with Alexis, sharing her story and reaching out to others who had experienced similar situations. With Alexis's help, they began organizing a movement. People from all over the country joined in, sharing their own experiences and pushing for change. The message was clear. No one should ever be made to feel like they didn't belong because of their appearance or their race. The woman couldn't believe how much had changed in such a short amount of time. She had gone from being turned away at the restaurant to becoming the voice of a growing movement. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew that she was no longer just a victim. She was a force for change. The woman woke up the next morning to find her phone buzzing nonstop. The social media posts she had shared were blowing up, with likes, shares, and comments pouring in from all corners of the country. Her simple message about being turned away from the restaurant had quickly turned into a movement. What she hadn't expected was how much support she would get. How many people felt the same way. She read through the comments as quickly as she could. There were hundreds, maybe thousands, of people sharing their own stories. Some of them had been denied entry to places because of their appearance. Others had been treated unfairly in ways that weren't always visible to the public. People were angry, but they were also inspired by the woman's courage to speak up. Among the comments were messages of support from celebrities, activists, and even local leaders. Her story had caught fire, and now it was everywhere. News outlets were picking it up. Reporters were reaching out for interviews. It felt like the world was listening to her. And the more she read, the more she realized that this was much bigger than she had imagined. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a private message from Alexis. "We need to make sure this story reaches the right people. Let's get in touch with the media and put together a plan." The woman felt a sense of urgency in the message. Things were moving fast, and she didn't want to waste any time. She quickly replied, "I'm in. Let's do it." Within hours, the woman and Alexis had gathered a team of people who were just as passionate about the cause. They began working together to put out a formal statement. The message was clear. No one should ever be judged by their appearance, and everyone deserved to be treated with respect, no matter where they went. The team worked day and night, writing press releases, reaching out to news outlets, and organizing interviews. It didn't take long before the restaurant in question was forced to respond. The woman had never wanted an apology from them, but now it seemed they had no choice. As the media storm continued to grow, the restaurant issued a statement, one that felt insincere to many. They apologized, but the damage had already been done. People weren't just upset about her treatment. They were upset about the larger issue of discrimination that had been ignored for too long. But the woman wasn't interested in their apology. She had made her point. The real work had just begun. The more she saw the response to her story, the more she realized that this was an opportunity to change things for good. She had started by sharing her experience, but now she was leading a movement that was pushing for real change. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been made to feel less than they were. The message was simple. Discrimination had no place in any part of society, and it was time for it to end. As her story continued to spread, more and more people began to join in. The media kept covering the growing movement, and the woman was invited to speak on news shows. Her voice was being heard, and it was a powerful one. The woman had always believed in her own strength, but now she was discovering just how much impact one voice could have. She had started with a small step, but that step had turned into a giant leap toward creating a world where everyone was treated with dignity. She wasn't just part of the story anymore. She was making the story. The woman sat at her desk, staring at her phone. The past week had been a whirlwind. Interviews, messages, and a flood of support. It had all happened so fast. She couldn't believe how much her simple post had grown into something so powerful. People from all walks of life had come together, sharing their own stories and showing solidarity. It felt like a dream come true. But there was still more work to be done. Her phone buzzed. It was a news alert. She tapped the notification, and the headline caught her eye. "Restaurant apologizes after backlash over incident." Her heart skipped a beat. The restaurant had finally responded. She clicked on the article and began reading. The restaurant had issued a public apology, saying they were deeply sorry for the incident. They claimed it was a misunderstanding, and that they had since reviewed their dress code policies. They promised to make changes to ensure something like this never happened again. The woman couldn't help but feel a wave of disappointment wash over her. The apology sounded so empty. It felt like they were just trying to put the situation to rest without truly understanding what had gone wrong. She knew they weren't sorry for their actions. They were sorry because their reputation had been tarnished. She wasn't buying it. She sat back in her chair, running her fingers through her hair. The restaurant's apology wasn't enough. It didn't address the bigger issue, the discrimination that people like her faced on a daily basis, the judgment based on appearance that had led to her being turned away in the first place. She picked up her phone and quickly texted Alexis. "They apologized, but it feels like they just wanted to go away. I don't think they truly understand what happened." A few seconds later, Alexis replied. I agree. But we can't stop now. This is the perfect opportunity to push for real change. Let's make sure the conversation continues. The woman nodded to herself, agreeing with Alexis. She wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The restaurant's apology didn't change the fact that she'd been treated unfairly. It didn't change the fact that people all over the world still face discrimination, sometimes in subtle ways, but always harmful. She knew this was just the beginning. She couldn't let the restaurant sweep this under the rug. She couldn't let it be a one-time mistake in their eyes. So she took a deep breath and picked up her phone. She began typing a message to her followers. Thank you to everyone who has supported me. The apology from the restaurant is a start, but we need more than just words. We need real action. This is about more than just one restaurant. It's about standing up for equality in every part of society. We need to hold institutions accountable and ensure that everyone is treated with respect. She paused for a moment before hitting send. The message felt right, strong, and clear. She wasn't going to let this be brushed aside. It wasn't enough for the restaurant to apologize. They had to prove they were committed to change. And the only way to make sure that happened was to keep the conversation going. As soon as she sent the post, the reactions started pouring in. People were agreeing, sharing, and even joining the conversation. The movement wasn't just about her anymore. It was about creating a world where everyone was treated with dignity, no matter their race, gender, or appearance. The woman smiled as she read through the supportive comments. She had started something bigger than herself, and now she was determined to see it through to the end. The days that followed were a blur of interviews, meetings, and planning. The woman had gone from being a person rejected from a restaurant to becoming a symbol of strength and change. Everywhere she went, people recognized her, not just for what had happened to her, but for what she was doing now. Her voice had become louder than she ever imagined. The movement had gained incredible momentum. People from all over were coming forward to share their own stories of discrimination and exclusion, many of them feeling like they had been silenced for too long. It was clear now that this wasn't just about one incident. It was about making sure everyone was treated fairly and with dignity. She was invited to speak at a conference on social justice, where she would be sharing her experience and calling for change. As the event grew closer, she felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. Speaking in front of hundreds of people was a big step, but she knew it was necessary. She couldn't stop now. This wasn't just for her. It was for everyone who had ever felt like they didn't belong. On the day of the event, she walked into the large auditorium, feeling a little overwhelmed by the crowd. The seats were filled with people who had come to hear her story, to learn from her, and to take action themselves. She could feel the energy in the room, a shared desire for change. When her time to speak arrived, she took a deep breath and walked up to the stage. The audience quieted, and all eyes were on her. She could see the faces of those who had come to hear her, and in that moment, she realized just how many people were ready for a change. They weren't just waiting for someone else to speak. They were ready to take action themselves. She began by sharing her experience, how she had been turned away from the restaurant, how it had felt to be judged based on her appearance. But she didn't stop there. She talked about the larger issue, the everyday discrimination that people of color, women, and other marginalized groups faced. She spoke about how important it was to stand up, to use our voices, and to demand respect. Her words were powerful, but it was the message behind them that really resonated with the audience. Change didn't happen overnight, but it could start with one person, one action, and one moment of courage. She encouraged everyone in the room to take a stand, to fight for equality in every corner of society. As she finished speaking, the room erupted into applause. She felt a rush of gratitude and pride. This was what she had been fighting for. This was the moment when everything changed, not just for her, but for everyone who had been told they didn't belong. Over the next few weeks, the movement continued to grow. More businesses began to reevaluate their policies. More people spoke out about the discrimination they had faced. And though there was still a long road ahead, the woman knew that they were moving in the right direction. The restaurant, which had once tried to brush the issue under the rug, now found itself facing pressure to make real changes. The woman had sparked something larger than herself, and it was clear that change was coming. But the best part, she realized that she wasn't alone anymore. The voices of everyone who had joined her were just as important. Together, they were rewriting the story, creating a world where no one would ever be made to feel like they didn't belong again. Weeks passed, and the momentum of the movement continued to grow. What had started as a single woman's post on social media had turned into a nationwide conversation. People were speaking up about their own experiences, businesses were being held accountable, and the world was beginning to change. The woman had never imagined how much power her voice could hold, but now she could see the impact of her actions everywhere. Her phone buzzed once again, interrupting her thoughts. This time, it was a message from Alexis. "You've done it. This is bigger than we ever thought. The changes are happening, and people are listening." She smiled as she read the message. It had been a long journey, but it was starting to feel like all the effort had paid off. She wasn't just a person who had been rejected from a restaurant anymore. She was a leader in a movement for equality, justice, and respect. The woman thought back to the moment when she had first been turned away. At that time, it felt like a small personal defeat, but now she realized that it had been the spark that ignited something far larger than herself. Her simple act of standing up for what was right had led to real, lasting change. One day, she received an invitation to visit a large company that had been inspired by her story. They wanted to discuss how they could make their own policies more inclusive and fair. It was another reminder of how far things had come. As she walked into the meeting room, she could see how serious they were about making a difference. The room was filled with people who had been moved by her message, and they were ready to take action. Together, they discussed new policies, training programs, and ways to ensure that everyone, no matter their background, would be treated with respect. The woman felt a sense of pride as she realized that the work she had started was already making waves. The changes were no longer just about one restaurant or one business. They were about creating a world where no one had to experience the kind of rejection she had faced. Later that week, she was invited to speak at a press conference about the progress that had been made. As she stood at the podium, looking out at the reporters and the cameras, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. This wasn't just her victory. It was the victory of everyone who had ever faced discrimination and injustice. When she spoke, her voice was clear and strong. "This movement isn't over," she said. "It's just the beginning. We've started something, but there's still much more work to be done. Together, we can build a world where everyone is treated with dignity, where no one is judged by their appearance, and where respect is given freely to all." The applause that followed was louder than she had ever imagined. She knew that her journey wasn't finished, but she also knew that she had helped create a shift, a change that would ripple out and affect generations to come. As she walked off the stage, surrounded by supporters and friends, she felt the weight of the responsibility on her shoulders. But she also felt hope for the future, hope that together they could continue to push for change. And most importantly, she felt proud of the courage it took to stand up, proud of the movement she had helped to start, and proud of the difference they had made. She had sparked a revolution of kindness, and it was just the beginning.